Hello, friends of Renew. I hope you're having a great day. I'm in a series here where I'm critically assessing Bart Ehrman's essay, What Do We Really Know About Jesus?, found in Newsweek, December 10th. In this essay, Bart Ehrman is ruining everyone's Christmas because he's arguing that the infancy narratives are not rooted in history. Gall, what a Scrooge. Next thing you know, he'll be arguing against Rudolph or something. So I'm spending the first couple of these blogs talking about the Gospels in general, and then I'll zero in and talk about Bart Ehrman's critique of the infancy narratives in particular. So here's what he says, and I quoted this in the previous blog. The Gospels are not the sorts of historical sources that we might hope for if we're seriously engaged in trying to reconstruct the events of history. The thing is that the Christian faith is centered on the claim that God became a human being at a particular point in time, at a particular point in history, and that he lived out, as this human being, lived out this life of perfect love and offered himself up on the cross. And in doing that, he revealed God's true character, he overcame powers of evil, and he reconciled human beings to himself. That's a historical claim. And so whether we believe it or not will depend, or should depend, largely on historical considerations. Now, if Ehrman's claim is true, the claim that I just read is true, then we'd have no reason to believe that, in fact, Jesus was the Son of God. We might still say this is a good story, an edifying, heartwarming story or something, but we couldn't believe that it's historically true, which means we couldn't believe in the Christian faith, at least not the historic Orthodox definition of the Christian faith, because that's always been anchored in history. What God actually did in history. I am of the persuasion that Bart Ehrman's claim is wrong. Now, it's true that the Gospels maybe aren't the historical sources we might hope for, in the sense that they're not trying to write an objective history of Jesus. They're not interested in history for history's sake. They're writing from a faith perspective. They aren't concerned with the accuracy of details the way contemporary historians might be. But if you accept them on their own terms, I mean, that's true of all ancient historical writings, and historians don't dismiss them for that reason. They just operate by a different standard. We have to deal with them on their own terms, and when we do that, my claim is that they give us every reason to believe that they're substantially reliable instead of being substantially legendary. My friend Paul Eddy and I wrote a book about this. Here's a little infomercial time. We wrote a book called the Jesus Legend. It's a pretty thick tome. And then a more popular version called Lord or Legend, although this edition's out of print, but it's out in a new edition with Whiffenstock. But in the Jesus Legend, we take on every scholarly argument that argues for viewing the Jesus of the Gospels as substantially legendary. We take it on, and we attempt to refute it. And in my humble opinion, I think we succeed. Today, I can't get into all that. What I'm going to do now is just paint in the broadest terms possible what is, I think, the strongest general consideration as to why the Jesus of the Gospels is not substantially legendary. The thing is this. Here's what needs to be explained. In the 30s, we know that a band of Jews went out into the Roman Empire and preached that Jesus was the Son of God. These were Orthodox monotheistic Jews, and they preached that Jesus was the Messiah. And by that they meant, as N.T. Wright argues, he was the very embodiment of Yahweh. What needs explaining is the fact that these new Christians, they preached the gospel they held was that they believed in, and they prayed to, and they worshipped this Jesus. And this Jesus was a contemporary of theirs, not someone who lived long, long ago and far, far away. No, this was a contemporary. His brother James was among the band that was preaching this. So the question that he's explaining is what can account for these monotheistic Orthodox Jews overturning really was one of the most fundamental aspects of their Jewish faith, that a human being should never be prayed to and worshipped. That was considered blasphemy. What can explain these monotheistic Orthodox Jews in the first century having all that overturned as they go out and preach this gospel? Now, they tell us why they believe. There's no mystery in this. The New Testament, they tell us that it's because of the life that Jesus lived, and because of the claims that he made, and because of the miracles that he did, and especially because of his death on the cross and the resurrection from the dead, their experience of him being raised. That's why they believe. And if that is true, well, now we can begin to understand how it is that these first century monotheistic Jews could overturn one of the most fundamental aspects of their faith and be praying to and worshiping a fellow contemporary human being as God, the embodiment of God. If it's true, everything is explained. But if it's not true, well, then what is the explanation for that? If it's not true, then it's false. Duh. And if it's false, it's either intentionally false, in which case, I mean, they know it's false, and therefore they're lying. We could call it the lying hypothesis. Or it's unintentionally false. They are sincerely preaching what they think is true, but it's not true. In which case, their faith is based on a legend. We could call it the legendary hypothesis. Those are really your only two alternatives if you're not going to accept their own explanation for why they believe what they believe. In the next blog, I'll begin to argue that both the lie hypothesis and the legend hypothesis are rather implausible. Until then, God bless you. Have a good day. Continue to live in love as Christ loved you and gave his life for you. Take care. Bye.